difference is the fact that a graveyard is always connected to a church, cemeteries away from it. They're all still part of the same church congregation. Now, this graveyard has what is considered to be now one of the most famous ghost stories in Charleston. And it actually happened relatively recently compared to how old this city is. It happened back in the 1980s. The date was June 13th, 1987. And there was this young guy, his name was Harry Reynolds. He was a local photographer here in Charleston, and he was going around this city taking pictures with his brand new, state-of-the-art Kodak camera. Now, this young guy was going all over the city, and he got here eventually at around sunset. He wanted to take some pictures inside the graveyard. So he went inside, did his thing, took a bunch of pictures, and for at least most of you, I'm assuming, who were alive in the 80s, you had to get your pictures developed at stores, if you remember that. So that's exactly what he did. Now, when he got the pictures from the photo shoot here back, he saw that in one of them in particular, there was something very wrong with it. Now, he was under the impression that maybe somebody had tampered with it who worked at the store. Or perhaps there was some sort of double exposure, something physically wrong with the camera and the film. Now, I'm going to go one by one, and I'm going to show you guys exactly what it was that he got a picture of. This is now considered to be one of the most controversial images ever taken in this city's history. And I want to be honest, when you guys see this, you're not going to make much sense of it. But I'll give you some context. What you're going to want to do is look right in the center of the picture. You're going to see what appears to be a woman hunched over or kneeling down in front of one of the graves. So just give me a second, and I'll start with you folks over here. All right, guys. So take a look at this. Here are tombstones. You guys see this image right here? Does that appear to be what I was describing? Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so over here, guys. So you see that right here below the grave? So this is what you captured. See it? Yep, it was right here in this graveyard. Y'all see that right here? Yep. How about you guys? Try to get you all here in this group. So you guys see that right here? Yep. How about you three? See that? Yeah, pretty clear, right? So the manager of the store said, hey, I didn't touch this. Nobody who works here would ever do such a thing. And I also don't see any evidence of any double exposure or anything wrong with your camera. So he took the picture and the camera and the film, put it all in a box, mailed it to Rochester, New York, where the headquarters of Kodak is. And they basically said the same thing to him. Nothing wrong with your camera or your picture or your film. So to finally get an answer for this situation, he came here to this congregation and he got the burial records for the graveyard. Now, the picture was taken in the very far back to the left of this graveyard. You can't really see the grave from here, but if you were to go inside during the daytime, you could most certainly do so. I will tell you guys what it says though. It says, here lies Sue Howard Hardy, died June 13th, 1887, exactly 100 years to the day from when he took this picture. Now, this woman here lived in Charleston. She was a member of this congregation, and she died in a way that a lot of women did in her time. Complications from childbirth. You see, she had given birth to a stillborn child and died 3 days after this as a result. And the last thing she ever wished for in life was to have the body of the child that she had given birth to buried with her in the crypt at St. Philip's Graveyard. And after her passing, her husband went to the congregation and told them exactly this. And they said, we cannot help you with this because your child was not baptized. Therefore, it can't be buried here on this holy consecrated earth. Now, he did not accept this. He came here with the child's body, broke in the graveyard in the middle of the night, undug the body of Sue Howard Hardy, and placed the two of them together where they have been every single day since. Now, like I said in the beginning, this is the most known ghost story in Charleston. It's going to be something you're probably going to hear again during your time here. It's very common. However, there is in fact one entity that I know of that doesn't pay any acknowledgement to it whatsoever. And that is this church. I'm not bashing them or anything, I'm just being honest. And there is no recognition of a person aside from her buried in the ground. It simply just says her name, Sue Howard Hardy, nobody else. Now, once the ghost tour industry in Charleston really picked up in the 1990s, a lot of people started coming here to tell this story. They specifically and very openly admitted they don't like us being out here. And they did things like this. They put up this plaque. It says, "The only ghost at St. Philip's is the Holy Ghost. So join us for worships on Sundays." That plaque was literally put up there for that exact reason, the ghost tour company. Now, we have hundreds of people come here from all over the world to try to replicate that picture. How many people do you guys think in over 30 years have actually been able to do that?
0.
Exactly. Now, I like starting the tour with stories like this. Very commonly known, it's just a good way to start things. Going forward, guys, it's going to get a lot worse. Trust me, some crazy stuff in the sound. But now, I think I'd like to take us to the graveyard. We're actually only about a half a block from there now, so we're going to go down Cumberland Street onto Meeting Street this way.
What are you doing, Nick? We were just here.
Alright guys, so this is the graveyard of what is called the Circular Church of Charleston, which is this one here. Now, the reason why they built this in a circle was because back in the day when it was built around 1853, the belief was if you build it in a circle, there's no room for the devil to hide in any corners or edges. It's a very religious time back then. Now, this is literally the oldest graveyard in South Carolina. There's some graves that go back to the 1600s in here. We're going to see them. A couple of things I want to keep in mind, though, during our time here. And it's not as relevant because it's still pretty bright outside, but nonetheless, there are 500 tombstones in here. Some of them are very small, so just please keep that in mind as we go through here tonight. Secondly, you're going to see a lot of A-frames and cones and caution tape. We have a college called the American College of Building Arts, and their historic preservation program is maintaining these graves to basically make them legible again if you can't read them. So please just kind of stay away from those graves if you don't mind. But like I said, take lots of pictures in here, guys. We get a lot of things on camera in here especially. Now, we're going to go around the corner. I want to show you guys the oldest tombstone in the state. Alright, so guys, see this big brick box looking thing? That is the oldest grave in South Carolina. It's called a box grave, literally. That's the type of style. There is a family of 15 people buried inside, the Simmons family, one of the first people to ever come to this area. They all died of a disease known as yellow fever. We're going to talk about that a lot during our time here tonight. So these here are also very old. These are from the early to mid 1700s. And you're probably wondering, why are they so close together? Well, technically there's nobody right here. It's to honor the lives of those buried under the church. Not only are we in the oldest graveyards in the city, we're also on top of what is called a potter's field, another word for a mass grave. It's one of Charleston's largest. From where that museum across the street is, all the way back to St. Philip's Church, there's 5,000 additional bodies buried all over the place. The lawn right there has 500 bodies just underneath that alone, and we're going to go over there in a minute too. Now, you guys are going to take this in and see that there's a lot of detail with these graves. This right here, this is called memento mori. It means to remember the dead in Latin. And this was actually a good thing. So whoever would have been buried here or had this grave meant that they believed in God and they wanted to go to heaven. Now, all of these are imported. These were all made in places like Rhode Island and Boston and other parts of Massachusetts, because at the time, South Carolina didn't have any quarries. This right here, this would have been the ultimate status symbol in colonial America. If you could afford to have your face engraved on a tombstone, it meant that you were very wealthy, and these people in Charleston were the wealthiest people in the world at one point. Now, with that being said, guys, I'm going to take us to a place I don't really like going, I'll be honest, and that's that lawn over there. We've had a lot of bad experiences over there over the years. There's a spirit that haunts that lawn that doesn't like people, but we're going to talk about her. So let's go around the corner, guys. out lovely, right? Yeah.
That's why you're not happy.
Yeah, that could be one thing.
Did the 15 people in the box too essentially all die at once?
No, so it was periodically. It was all from the same thing though, ironically. And this thing was, they put them in the so my understanding is they didn't break the grading. It used to be outside of it. But yeah, that is the oldest grave in South Carolina today. So, you know, as a tour guide who's lived here for a while, I've come to learn that there are places in Charleston that you really enjoy, but other places you don't want to be. For me, that's two places. One is called the Old City Jail. It's on the other side of town. The place is horrendous. But this place right here where we stand, this mass grave. Now, why is that? Well, I've had a lot of experiences here over the years. And so the reason as to why there's so many people buried here is that disease I mentioned, yellow fever. So yellow fever was transmitted by mosquitoes. It was very devastating. It killed millions of people in this country hundreds of years ago. Now, in the city of Charleston, in the mid-1800s, we had such a horrendous outbreak. Over 1,000 people a week were dying. And this is only when we had like 70,000 people in the city. Now, at this time, there was a young woman. Her name was Sarah Pratt. She was a young single mother of 2 little boys. Unfortunately, those 2 boys got yellow fever and they passed. And so 2 weeks later, she also contracted it as well. But prior to her death, her sons were buried right here where we are standing. And they would literally line up bodies in rows and stack them until they physically could not anymore. And they'd sprinkle oyster shell and lye on the bodies to help with the smell and the decomposition of them. Now, when she passed, it was noted that she was buried in this beautiful and elegant blue dress. Probably one of the few nice possessions that she actually owned. So, 20 years after her passing, we had the world's worst earthquake at the time. That was in 1886. And so there used to be a steeple right there above the church. The earthquake was so devastating that it broke off the steeple, it fell, and it hit the lawn right here. And as you can imagine, hundreds of those bodies were unearthed, right? All over this part of town, including her and her 2 sons' bodies. Now, as recently as 2017, we had this brand new tour guide, a young college girl, was very enthusiastic, very happy to be here, did all the training, and got the key to the graveyard. Normally after 7:30, these gates are closed, and we, aside from the congregation, are the only people in Charleston who can come in here after a certain time. So, it was her first ghost and graveyard tour she had ever done. And she had a party of 20 people. It was a sold-out tour. Now, they tried to come in from the main entrance behind us, not the side entrance we came. And so as she took the key out and opened it up and started to bring people inside here, she heard this very loud screaming coming from right here. Now, she peered over the gate and looked in the direction of this noise. And what it sounded like was a person, specifically a woman, saying that you are not allowed to be here. Now, when she looked over, it was in fact a woman. However, her back was facing her, so she could not see what she looked like whatsoever. And this woman was crawling around right around here on all 4s. And it sounded like she was sobbing. So she was under the impression, all right, there's a logical explanation for this. This lady is intoxicated, maybe she lost her friends, she could be homeless. There's a logical explanation as to why a woman is telling me that I can't be inside the graveyard, that only my company can be in at this time. So being the kind young lady she was, she asked the woman if she was all right, if there was something that she could do to help. I work for Bulldog Tours, and I am in fact allowed to be. And that woman responded with even more anger, telling everybody that they needed to get out. But she wasn't convinced, this young girl. So she said, everybody, I want you to wait on the sidewalk. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to see what it is this woman needs help with. So she took off the lock. She walked down the pathway here. Started walking on the lawn towards this woman. Now keep in mind, her back is still to her. She can only hear her. She can't see what she looks like. But when she got about right here, that woman literally sprang around and came charging at her, crawling on all fours. Now, this triggered her flight or flight response or something like that, because that girl was so mortified by this that she ran out of the graveyard, ran all the way back to the office, you know how far away that is, gave them the key, and said, I am done. I'm never coming back here again. She was that frightened. Now, the crazy thing about all this, guys, not only did this young girl see this woman, every single person on that sidewalk in that tour explained that they saw her too. And they said the moment that she left this graveyard, that woman literally disappeared in front of their eyes. Gone. Completely dead. Now, I typically offer people to get their picture taken here. I get a lot of people who want to do that, and I get a lot of people who don't want to do that. Does anybody want their picture taken right here? I'm more than willing to do that for you. People seem to really love this who don't want anything to do with this. No, it's understandable. I don't like it either. But in that, going off that, guys, once we make our way back that way, I'd like to take us to the back of the graveyard. I want to show you guys a 500-year-old oak tree. So we're going to talk about that. So one more time, any takers who wanted to get a picture taken? Yeah, we'll pass. Sounds good. I'll send it.
I'll go over there. Come on, take my picture.
I'll take it from here.
There you go.
Guys, before we go any further, I always get a lot of questions about the graves in here because we have a lot of different kinds of graves in here. So, I want to clarify that, or we use this for example. This is a headstone. This is a footstone. That would show you where the person's feet were when they were buried. Obviously, they were very young. Yes, they were both twin brothers, very young. Probably not, I think they were maybe toddlers, just a couple of years old at that. But you also have other things like these. So these are known as garden graves or an English style of grave. This is very popular during the Victorian era, the 1800s. What they would do is they would put things like flowers and herbs, spices, things like that to make it very aesthetically pleasing and smell nice. So you'll see that evolution of things over this period. Now, why are some of these graves elevated and look like they're square? Well, we started to figure out there were hurricanes in this state. And a lot of flooding happened, especially here. So the bodies are down below, technically, but it was an effort to try to prevent them from flooding out and being washed away. And that happened a lot here. Yeah, because that's the third church on the property. So guys, let's do this. Let's get underneath the tree. I'm going to talk about not only the tree, but I'm also going to talk about this mausoleum too.
Who puts the flowers out?
Sorry?
Who puts the flowers out?
Oh, I mean, we still have a lot of people who maintain this property, the families. Very well maintained congregation. All right, guys, so this right here is the second oldest tree in South Carolina. The oldest is called the Angel Oak. It's on Johns Island. It's about 45 minutes from here. That tree is about 2,000 years old. This one's about 500 years old. Now, this oak tree has seen a lot in its time. Back in the early days of Charleston, one second.
Which is the 500 years?
This one right here.
Which was the 2,000?
It's called the Angel Oak. It's on Johns Island, South Carolina, about 45 minutes from here. Now, guys, this is the tree where they would take pirates to be hanged in Charleston. And they wouldn't hang them by the neck. That was far too humane. What they would do is they'd hang them in these cages called gibbets. And they were very small. They could humanely fit maybe 2 or 3 people. But they put up to 10 of pirates in there at a time. And they would hang them from the limbs of the tree for several weeks until they died. Now, there is also this other tradition, belief here in South Carolina, that you shouldn't really ever stand underneath an oak tree at nighttime. And I know it's not dark yet, but it is night. So where does that come from? Why am I telling you this? Well, there is another subculture in this city. They're called the Gullah people. They're the descendants of the Africans that came here hundreds of years ago. And they did not have a language they spoke, so they had to make one. It's called Gullah. It's still spoken today. It's a mix of English and West African languages. And one of the things they talked about when they communicated were ghosts and evil spirits. One of the things they talked about were haints. That is spelled H-A-I-N-T. It is a Gullah word. It translates to haunt or evil spirit or ghost in English. And the only thing that's going to keep you safe from these things, which live inside the oak trees, these haints, are being around water or the color blue. And that is because these things are kind of like vampires. They can only come out during the nighttime, not the day. So people started to paint this light blue color, known as haint blue, on their houses. And that's why you see so much of it here. It's an old tradition to keep these evil spirits off your property. And I mean, you can literally go to the Home Depot or Lowe's and buy as much haint blue paint as you want. It's a very relevant thing even today. Now, let's talk about this, guys. This is a mausoleum. What a mausoleum was used for is basically a mass grave. This was the Hudson and Pereno Mausoleum. These two families shared this for a very long time. Now, technically, there are no more bodies inside, and that wasn't because they wanted it to be that way. Back in '89, we had a really bad hurricane called Hugo, and it was so devastating that the water pressure opened up this door, and it physically washed away every single one of those bodies inside. And to this day, we have no idea what happened to them over 30 years later. Now, I'm going to clarify something real quickly. The story I'm going to be telling did not happen right here, but it did involve a mausoleum, and this is a good tool for the storytelling purpose. It did, in fact, though, happen to a family from Charleston. So, during the Civil War, we had the worst yellow fever outbreak in the city's history. And you got to understand something. You know, today we understand that yellow fever was caused by mosquitoes. But back then, they were under the impression it was caused by the devil or some kind of evil spirit. So people were dying very quickly. And at this time, there was a family called the Lagree family. Big time family down here. And they had 2 children. They had their daughter, Julia. She was a teenager. And they had their older son. His name was John. And he was off in Virginia fighting in the Confederacy. So word got out that this small town called Edisto Island, which is about a half hour south of here, has no yellow fever. The devil cannot make his way down there. What was actually going on? The mosquitoes could not travel against the coastal winds. So, like many of these people, the Lagree family had a beach house on the island. And they packed their belongings and their daughter, and they made their way down there to try to ride this out. Unfortunately, within a couple of days of being there, Julia contracted yellow fever and she died. Now, the family had a mausoleum just like this, and they wanted to bury her inside like their other family members. A couple of days after her funeral and her burial, they got word that their only other child, their son, was killed in action in Virginia. So they had his body brought down to South Carolina to be buried with his sister. Now, when they opened up the mausoleum door to put his body inside, they saw something that horrified them. Now, when Julia was buried there, she was placed in the very far back to the left-hand side, where there was adequate space for her body. However, when they opened the door, she was right here, by the entrance. Looking further at the bottom of the door, there were tons of scratch marks at the bottom of it. She was accidentally buried alive. And tragically, that happened a lot back then. Yellow fever would put people into comas, and they had no way of really proving if you were dead or alive back then. Nothing valid, at least. So, being inside something like this would be like being inside of an oven for several days, because this was August, which is the hottest month of the year down here. Now, as heartbreaking as this was, they still wanted to honor the lives of their children. So they buried them together inside this mausoleum. And they came back the following morning to pay their respects. However, when they returned, once again, something was very wrong. The mausoleum door was wide open, not the way that they had left it. Grave robbery was a huge problem down here back then. But after looking inside, not a single body was taken out or touched whatsoever. And so to stop this type of intrusion from happening again, they put these massive iron bars in front of the door, hoping that that would stop anybody from coming in again. They came back the next day. Those iron bars were on the ground and the door was open again. But just as last time, not a single thing had happened. None of the bodies had been moved at all. So to finally stop anything from happening, they took every single one of those bodies out and buried them at the closest graveyard. And when they did that, nothing ever happened with this mausoleum ever again. Now, I attest that to the spirit of Julia, making sure that her brother did not have to go through the horrible things in life that she had to endure in the end of it. Now, that might sound crazy to you guys, but if you're really interested in trying to figure this out, you can try this too. There's a tradition here in South Carolina. It's like 100 years old, and that tradition is spending the night in the Lagree Mausoleums. It's public property. You can go do that right now. Nobody has ever been able to spend the whole night, not even the bravest of people. They all experience the same exact thing. They get this overwhelming feeling of sadness and grief. If you stay even longer, people have physically felt something or someone pushing them towards the entrance, as if it was gesturing for them to leave. And those who have stayed even longer have heard the whisper of a young woman telling them to leave. I also think that that is due to Julia ensuring that nobody at all has to go through the horrors that she went through. Quick question, is anyone getting bitten up by bugs right now?
Yes.
I am too. This is horrible. Yeah, so let's get away from here. I was